Hi everyone, welcome back to Stereo Niche. This week I'm going to review the studio monitor that kicked off the whole monitor frenzy. And that of course is the Yamaha 1000M. Come right back. All right, well thanks for coming back. So let's talk about the Yamaha NS-1000 monitor. So before I get there, there were two different versions. So these came out in 1974, and they were the 1000M or 1000 monitor, which was sort of geared to the professional studio, recording studio, and recording studio isn't just for music, but that's also radio stations and local TV stations and movie theater, movie productions, as well as music. So all of them require, some audio engineer to come out with that final, audio. But to do that, they go through, series of tweaks and changes to the music and things. And so monitors, which were in the studios well before these, of course, because, the 50s, the 40s, the 20s, et cetera. They all had recordings, and so they had monitors. They just maybe didn't call them specifically that, but they were large, boxes, at that time, that were put in these studios. And the idea was they wanted a speaker that was relatively flat so that they could sort of tweak it, because they knew that movie theaters sort of had their own, types of emphasis. They wanted to maybe, make the low end heavier, or, the high end for, radio perhaps. And so they were tweaking it, for the audience and the demographic that they were targeting. So that was the idea of, what is a monitor? Well, from what we know today, we often think of monitors as, relatively small, but in prior years and decades, they were very, very large. In the older, say, in the 1960s and prior, or 1950s rather, and then later in the 70s, this was pretty much the size of a monitor. There were some others that were larger, like from Altec, but this was pretty much the size. They also called this a bookshelf back then, and a bookshelf by us today is pretty small. But this is 68 pounds. Nothing we would consider today as a bookshelf. But in fact, that's what they called them. So the monitor, or the NS-1000M, the 1000 is the consumer model, and it comes in a wood veneer, wood lacquered veneer. The 1000M monitor came only in this black ash, I believe it is, finish. It does have a grill. I have them sitting off to the side, but most everyone ran them grillless because they look cool. And the speakers and drivers, have a metal mesh over them to keep, people. Amazingly, I've seen adults even want to go push in dust caps and things. It's a crazy thing. But anyway, they have protection over them, so you can run them, without any kind of a grill to sort of protect them. But what was ahead of its time in 1974, Yamaha came out with these drivers made from beryllium. And beryllium is an exotic, hard to find material. It's also toxic, by the way. And they had to essentially in powder form, they had to spray it into a mold, many, many layers until they got to the thickness that they wanted. The benefit is that it's lighter and more rigid than other materials. So that by itself set them apart from really anyone else. No one else. Only companies many, many decades later even came back to use beryllium, but pretty amazing to even think that that's, what they did in the mid 70s. So they also have a couple, attenuation here, on the high end and the mid range. So another, way to tweak them, to your liking as well. But some comparisons, I do all of my reviews. I compare them all to the New Large Advent. So some of the metrics there, the New Large Advents that I use are from 78. These are from 74, or at least when I say they're from 74, they were manufactured initially and started in 74. Same from the Advent. And so the MSRP on these were around $1,000 a pair. On the Advent, they were around $350. The impedance, they're both 8 ohm speakers. Sensitivity, about the same. The Advents are 89, these are 90, so not really much of it in the way of any difference. The one significant difference is the fact that this is a 3-way design, tweeter, mid-range, woofer, and the Advent is a 2-way, just a tweeter and a woofer. So those are some of the baseline metrics for the review. So what I'll do now is get this one back into the system. I'll go through my tracks and listen to everything and the different music that I put on, and I'll come back to you with my thoughts on how do they compare. So stick around. All right, well, let's get into the review. I spent, a good quality time with them and played lots of different music in this case. I wanted to sort of throw a lot of different music at them. Some were bass heavy, some were more instrument heavy, and some were very vocal heavy, etc. And I sat down, I walked around, actually, most of the time I don't move the speakers as well, but I did move these. I swapped them, same position, but I did swap them for a period of time. I wanted to hear if the tweeter position made a significant difference or not, so I did do that. But that was pretty much it. Same gear as always, and went through their paces. So let's get into it. I always start out with style, and these have a bit of a dual personality, I think. If you wanted to sort of, subdue them into the room, I think putting the grill on is obviously the way to go. Back when these came out, mid-70s, black was I don't think was a very common offering, for most speakers. So that made them stand out, a bit. And maybe the intention was, in a way, to sort of blend them into the room a bit. And so if you wanted to hide them, putting the grills on is certainly beneficial. But that's not the way most people run them, of course. So most people take the grills off because they want to show off those cool drivers. And that's the majority. Now, the benefit of these drivers, of course, is that they all have covers on them. So you don't have to worry about, little fingers getting in there and that desire to push in the dust cap, which on these would be pretty damaging. You can't really push in a beryllium, driver. So they're protected. You can certainly run them this way without fear of, little fingers, getting in there, which is what you were worried about a lot of times with others, or I guess cats as well, which is not something I have to consider. But taking off the grill, and it's different personality. It definitely stands out. And like the Pioneer TZ9 I reviewed prior, they have that cool factor. And for that reason, I gave them an extra point compared to the Advent. I gave them a 14, whereas I've given the Advent a 13. So that's where they came out on the styling end of things. Now moving into imaging. there's always a theme I tend to find when I'm reviewing speakers, and I have that theme here. And the theme is a bit of expecting more. And it's partially my fault because it's a legendary speaker, and it set the ground, work for popularizing the monitor. It was, the one that made the monitor a thing, and how many, companies came out, with their monitors and, copied that, that market success. So I guess because of that, I just had an expectation that was built up over time. Now, I've not had these speakers all that long. I probably had them, I think, about 9 months now. So it's not a speaker I've spent a lot of time with. And for that reason, I just didn't, I just had a bigger expectation for them. So when it came to the imaging, I was expecting, a lot more. I mean, I'd recently done the Pioneer TZ9. I had done the Polk SDAs, and it was pretty grand. And when I did that comparison here, they're very similar to the Advent. Now, the soundstage is only slightly bigger. It's bigger, but only slight. I didn't find it to be dramatically different. The one thing that is different that I will say about the sound quality of it overall is that although it doesn't have a huge soundstage, what I did experience is that when I switch back and forth, these actually somewhat felt a bit veiled in a way. And when I switched over, the other theme I'll say here is that this is just a much more lively speaker. I'm hesitant to say bright. It is certainly brighter because of the way the tweeter works, which I'll get to later, but it is definitely more lively. So if that's a sound quality or signature that you really like, then I think this is definitely the speaker for you. It is certainly brighter than other speakers, and in fact, I've never ever felt like these were veiled. But in this sense, and maybe that is also that clinical perception that people get when they say that they will bring out deficiencies in your stereo chain, of a gear. I hear that. I've read that quite often about them, and maybe that's what that people think that they're hearing in that regard. To me, I just define it as being more bright, and that's definitely a sound signature difference overall between the two. So for imaging, I gave it the same. I ended up giving it a 15, just like I had given the Advents. Moving into low end, again, I had an expectation that again, that this cabinet, it's a just extremely overbuilt cabinet. When you grab this thing, it feels like one piece of granite in a way. It's overly braced. Or I don't know if you can say overly, but it's significantly braced, and the entire cabinet, it's just solid. It's rigid all the way around. When you rap on this thing, it's just thud. There's just nothing insignificant about it. Every crevice in there seems to be filled with something, and there's just no echo sound whatsoever. So because of that, I had my feeling was going to be that it shook the ground when on the low end, and it was better than the Advent in a more controlled way. When it did feel like that was sort of the difference. It was a controlled bass, which seems pretty logical, but not dramatic in a way. But I did give it another point. I gave it a 15 for the low end versus the Advent at a 14. Moving into the mids. Mids were good, really good here. Which I do, if you like singers and you want to hear their voice, out in front of you and pronounced, they absolutely do that, and they did it very well. It was enjoyable, and I would say it was more live sounding, a little more raspiness in the voice is detected, and just that feeling that the artist is sort of right in front of you. That was much better, which I've always raved about the Advents. I'm always shocked that being two drivers that it can do that, but The Yamahas were better. Again, not so dramatic, but enough that I gave them another point. So I gave them a 17, for the mids, whereas I have a 16 on the Advents. On to the highs. The highs, I wrote this 3 times. Crisp. The highs are very crisp. And that beryllium tweeter, I guess, is the reason for that. But I did not find it fatiguing. As I've mentioned in other videos, I have some sensitive ears, and some tweeters have given me fatigue, and I will feel my ears start to ache within minutes. And I didn't get that at all. And it was just, and this is what I mentioned a few minutes ago, the crispness or the brightness of the entire speaker, in a way, presents itself here. And I'm sure the tweeter is what's leading the way, but it's when you switch tracks between the two, it's almost like it took the grill off of the Advent, and it just opened up, and that's what the Yamahas, brought. I had never felt like that was the case with the Advents before, but they're just a much brighter, lively speaker overall. But I can't say that I enjoyed the highs better than the Advent. So in that case, I ended up giving them a 16, even though there was a clear difference in the sound. But I think some people that really enjoy that kind of a high end or brightness, I think they will, which they get a lot of rave reviews. And I think that's the people who like that sort of liveliness in a speaker. I think that's what they're getting out of it. And for them, that's a lot more enjoyable. Although I can't say I did not enjoy it. I think it's a great speaker. I think what I lean to is that soundstage and that sort of expansive experience. I think is what, for me, in my preferences, I think that's what I typically lean into. And so I think that's the reason I just didn't have that overwhelming experience, with these. I didn't connect to them in that way. So if you're keeping up with the totals here, the Yamaha got a 77, whereas the Advents, score 74. I was, I'll be honest, I was expecting it to hit at least an 80. In my head, I was putting this iconic speaker in here, and it was going to rock the house and blow the Advents away, and they were going to be at a completely different level. And I have to say, I just, unfortunately, I didn't get there with them. I like them. It's not like I don't like them at all. I do, but again, I think the legendary status of them preceded my listening, and so it had some influence on my expectation. So I think that's what I would have to say about them. If you've got these speakers and let me know your experience with them. I would love to hear your feedback. I'm sure that there are some changes to how putting them on their sides, putting against the wall. I'm sure there's placement issues that I can address here and change. But again, I try to be consistent with all of the positioning that I do for them. But let me know your feedback and your experience. I'd love to read those comments. And let's see, I think that's I did want to mention something about these speakers. One issue that I had with them, and I think it's somewhat common, is that the woofers the magnets can become misaligned. And if that happens, the woofer becomes locked, and it won't move, of course. It's one of the only, there might be others, it's just a common issue for this particular speaker. It can be fixed, and I sent mine on. One of these had that issue. I sent it to a specialist, and they realigned it, and the speaker was fine. But should you find a set of speakers and the woofer's not working, just note that probably is the issue, and it can be fixed. But I wouldn't say you want to assume it can be fixed. You need to price them accordingly, and that you might need to get a new woofer. But in my case, it was fixable. And that was the only issue that I had with it. Outside of that, let me know your experience again. And if you like the videos, please hit subscribe. And you want to get those notifications, hit that bell. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in.